When Daniel Hart appeared on the roadside near Shoshone 3 years after the day he went missing, he was skin and bones thin, sunburned beyond recognition, his beard and hair matted into clumps, and wearing only tattered rags draped over his body. The man who had vanished in the over 120 degrees Fahrenheit heat of Death Valley, the man whom both his family and the authorities had long believed was dead. But the most haunting thing was not his physical condition. The most haunting thing was what he whispered about those 3 years, about the place where he was held underground, and about the person who was still hiding somewhere among the scorching canyons of the Mojave Desert. And the question that sent chills across America was, how many people have walked into this desert and never come back? Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In the middle of summer, Death Valley National Park radiates heat like the breath of a gigantic machine, dry, harsh, and heavy to the point that the sky itself seems to shimmer. Against the scorched white ground, the extreme heat warning signs stand like final cautions for anyone daring to venture deeper into this land. Extreme heat danger, do not hike. After 10 a.m., tourists at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center move hurriedly, everyone trying to find the rare patches of shade to escape the sunlight that slices down like layers of sharp blades. Among that crowd was Daniel Hart, 34 years old, living in Bakersfield, appearing with the strange calm of someone accustomed to being outdoors, or of someone trying to act like he was fully prepared for a place where humans can usually only endure a few steps. He stopped in front of the information board for the Golden Canyon Gower Gulch Trail, the last signal of civilization before the harsh terrain swallows everything. Daniel tightened his backpack straps, checked his water bottle again, wiped the sweat from his neck, then bent down to retie his shoelaces. After that, he looked up, staring straight into the vast emptiness of the golden red canyons billowing with hazy heat. No one knows what he was thinking: excitement, overconfidence, or simply wanting to get away from everything on a day that felt too long. But clearly, he decided to go in there alone. Leaving behind the rumbling of car engines and the lively groups of tourists, Daniel turned onto the less traveled trail, where only a few faint old footprints remained on the dark-colored sand. His figure separated from the crowd like a solitary pen stroke extending deep into the canyon. The rising heat blurred his shape until only the bright color of his shirt and the wide-brimmed hat flapping in the hot wind could be made out. The last witnesses who saw him all remembered scattered details. A tourist couple from Illinois said they saw a tall man in bright-colored clothing heading deep into the rocky canyon, walking steadily with determination. A ranger who briefly passed the parking lot remembered that Daniel looked very confident about his hike, with no sign of hesitation or uncertainty. No one knew that those were the final moments he would be seen in the world. Back in Bakersfield, a few hours after Daniel set out, his wife received a photo he sent. His smile mixed with the harsh sunlight, behind him the Golden Mountain Range and the high-temperature warning sign that Daniel jokingly said, "Looks intense, but it's still fine." She sent back a smiling emoji, then continued her workday, certain he would return quickly like every previous trip. But by afternoon, dinner was set out and gradually grew cold. She called Daniel, no answer. 1 call, 2 calls, then 5 calls. Messages sent only showed delivered, with no sign of being read. Outside the window, the orange sunlight slowly turned purple, finally becoming a pitch-black darkness like ink. In Death Valley, the temperature dropped, but the wind howled stronger, whipping sand against the parking lots that were gradually emptying of cars. In Bakersfield, his wife paced back and forth in the living room, turned on the TV but couldn't comprehend anything that was playing. When the clock neared midnight, the worry was no longer within the bounds of logic. She double-checked the plan he mentioned that morning, just going for a bit and coming back. But a bit had turned into nearly 12 hours of complete loss of contact. The frightening questions began piling up. Accident? Heat stroke? Car broken down in the desert? Or something even worse? Finally, with trembling hands, she picked up the phone and called the park ranger's direct line. Her voice broke as she said that her husband had gone hiking in Death Valley since morning and hadn't returned yet, with absolutely no contact. From the moment of that report, Daniel Hart officially became a missing person in Death Valley, a place where any disappearance carries implications darker than the night itself. Daniel's wife's call to the ranger dispatch came just as the night shift was sinking into the heavy silence of Death Valley. Inside the Furnace Creek Ranger Station, the dim yellow light shone on a desk covered in maps, radios, and tracking devices. The on-duty ranger, Travis Monroe, was used to minor tourist assistance requests getting slightly lost, overheating vehicles, needing more water, but the trembling woman's voice on the other end made him sit up straight immediately. "My husband went hiking this morning. He still hasn't come back. I've been calling, but he doesn't pick up." With just those few words, Monroe understood this was no ordinary case of being lost. He opened the incident log software on his computer, marked the missing person category, and entered the name that would begin 3 years of haunting for Death Valley. Daniel Hart, 34 years old, male, last seen Golden Canyon trailhead. Monroe quickly asked the standard questions: vehicle type, license plate, expected departure time from the park, health condition, gear carried. When Daniel's wife said he only planned a short loop and was carrying just a small backpack, Monroe glanced at the clock. 11:42 p.m. With daytime temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit, hiking alone through Golden Canyon after 10 a.m. was already dangerous. Being missing for nearly half a day with no contact was a bad sign. Very bad. He moved to the next step, checking the park entry-exit log system. Though Death Valley doesn't have controlled gates like many other national parks, some entry points have sensors that record license plates for visitor statistics. The system showed Ford Escape, CA8JX 27 liters. Entry logged 08:14 a.m. No recorded exit. The words "no exit" froze Monroe for a few seconds. If Daniel's vehicle hadn't left the park, it was very likely he was still out there somewhere in one of the most extreme weather regions in North America. Without hesitation, Monroe grabbed his ranger jacket, radio, and patrol vehicle keys. He reported to his supervisor over the system. Possible overdue hiker, male, Golden Canyon. Beginning vehicle verification. Death Valley at midnight carries a terrifying silence. The wind blows hard through the rocky canyons, creating sounds like metal scraping against each other. The ranger vehicle's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating layers of red-black earth. Monroe drove to every parking lot near Golden Canyon, Gower Gulch, Zabriskie vicinity, then back to the main trailhead. At the third lot, he stopped abruptly. The silver Ford Escape, license plate CA8JX 27 liters, sat motionless under the moonlight. No one inside, no one around, and the layer of dust on the windows showed the car had been parked since morning. Monroe's heart pounded. He immediately radioed back. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Monroe. Request sheriff notification. Missing hiker, confirmed." Just minutes later, the Inyo County Sheriff's internal line came through. "We're on our way." Preserve the scene. The sheriff's arrival in the night meant Daniel's case was no longer an ordinary overdue hiker. It had officially been escalated to missing person priority 1, the level reserved for cases with high risk of death. From that moment, the emergency investigation process began operating like a familiar but cold machine. First step: verify bank card activity and phone pings. Sheriff Representative Deputy Alvarez arrived on site while opening his laptop connected to the federal system. "No card activity since morning," he reported. "Phone last ping, 2:13 p.m. weak signal, somewhere between Golden Canyon and Manly Beacon Ridge." That area had almost no cell service, a stone maze where phone signals vanish completely. Second step: contact gas stations and nearby cameras. Death Valley doesn't have many cameras, but the gas stations at Furnace Creek and Stovepipe Wells sometimes capture license plates. A dispatcher was sent to call all locations within a 30-mile radius. No camera recorded Daniel leaving the park. No transactions for buying water, supplies, or gas. Third step: contact the SAR search and rescue team. Though mobilizing forces right in the night was limited due to dangerous terrain, Alvarez requested the SAR team go on standby at 5:00 a.m., the most feasible time before temperatures rose to levels threatening both victim and rescuers. Notification was sent to Civil Air Patrol to prepare aerial search in the morning. Monroe returned to Daniel's car, doors locked. No signs of struggle, no scattered belongings. But the car remaining at the trailhead meant Daniel had definitely entered the trail on foot and never came back. If he got heat stroke, he wouldn't have gone far, Monroe thought. But if he lost direction and veered into Gower Gulch? Oh God. In the darkness of Death Valley, all rangers know a cruel truth. Just a few hundred meters in the wrong direction, and the human body can run out of water in 45 to 90 minutes. Losing orientation in canyons, distorted by sunlight, is a death sentence. Around 2 a.m., Sheriff Alvarez completed the initial scene report. "We're opening a county-level investigation," he announced. "From this moment, Daniel Hart is officially a missing person under hazardous conditions." A new file was created in the system, Case DV 2025-1947, Missing Hiker, Hart, Daniel. Every detail would be logged there. From when the vehicle was found, the last GPS data, to the weather that day. On the way back to the station, Monroe glanced in the rearview mirror, where the lights from Daniel's car still flickered in the darkness. A chilling feeling crawled up his spine, the feeling every ranger understands. When a vehicle stays behind but the person vanishes, Death Valley usually doesn't return them. Dawn, in Furnace Creek, is unlike anywhere else. It doesn't rise gradually like in temperate climates. It bursts suddenly, sharply, as if the sun was yanked up from the horizon. The first light sweeps across the pale white ground of Death Valley, revealing strips of minerals reflecting into blinding layers. The temperature at this hour is still bearable, around 88 degrees Fahrenheit, but anyone who's been here long knows, before 10 a.m., it will soar to levels where just standing outside can make a normal person dizzy. Right in front of the visitor center, rangers had already started setting up the Incident Command Post, ICP, just minutes after the clock passed 5:30 a.m. A field tent was erected on the concrete, still holding the night's chill. Inside, the topo map of Golden Canyon Gower Gulch was spread out, with a few red, yellow, and blue markers scattered on the table. The computer opened to Sartopo software, radios constantly crackling due to weak signals. A whiteboard was placed right by the entrance, with freshly written words. "Missing hiker. Daniel Hart, LKP, confirmed." Ranger Travis Monroe, who was on duty the previous night, along with 2 other rangers, began reviewing data from the internal system. A window on the screen showed transaction history of tourists at the Furnace Creek General Store. The records showed Daniel had purchased 1 1-liter bottle of water, 1 protein bar, 1 paper map of Golden Canyon, no sunscreen, no electrolyte salts, no extra water. Monroe sighed. For a beginner hiker, this was no different from walking into a furnace with a bucket that has a hole in the bottom. Outside the tent, Sheriff Deputy Alvarez was talking to a group of people who had just pulled into the lot. He questioned each one, gently but quickly, because every passing second shortened the victim's time. "Did you see a man hiking alone, bright-colored shirt, wide-brimmed hat, around 9 a.m. yesterday?" One group of tourists wasn't sure. A couple from Minnesota nodded. Yes, he was heading into Golden Canyon. Looked like he was following a map. This detail was immediately noted and entered into the event database. Inside the ICP, Ranger Nolan was double-checking the vehicle sensor logs at park entry points. Not many national parks have sensors tracking vehicle counts, but Death Valley does due to the annual death toll being higher than average. Daniel's license plate was recorded entering the previous morning, but there was no log of the vehicle exiting. This was a critical sign. If the car hadn't left the park, there was a very high chance Daniel was still within the park boundaries, alive or not. Next, the ICP determined the last known point, LKP, the last position confirmed by physical evidence. The silver Ford Escape, parked at the Golden Canyon trailhead lot. From this LKP, the entire search strategy would be built. SAR always treats the LKP as the center of all operations. expanding in a fan pattern based on terrain and the victim's likely movement habits. At 7:00 a.m., the Inyo County SAR search and rescue team arrived. They brought tools precise down to every footstep. GPS devices, heat-resistant binoculars, Yeti bags filled with ice water, grid markers, climbing ropes, and sun-resistant notebooks. A number of seasoned volunteers from the California Rescue Task Force also showed up. These were people familiar with searching for individuals in the desert and who had faced many missing persons cases in Death Valley before. A tactical briefing meeting was held immediately. Alvarez stood in front of the large map, using a red marker to circle the priority areas. From Golden Canyon, Manly Beacon, Gower Gulch, Badlands Loop. "My team will not treat this as just a search," he said. "This is a parallel search and investigation from the very first minute. Miss nothing. We don't know if this is simply a weather-related disappearance or if there's another factor." SAR divided into 3 teams. Air Search Team Civil Air Patrol, plus NPS helicopter. Fly low to avoid the heat layer that distorts images. Scan the entire Golden Canyon range and the area around Manly Beacon. Look for small shaded spots where exhausted people often seek shelter from the sun. Ground Search Alpha Team. Hike along Golden Canyon, checking every meter of ground on both sides, marking areas already covered. Observe footprints, slide marks, displaced rocks, dropped items. Ground Search Bravo Team. Circle toward Gower Gulch. The area often confusing due to many similar side branches. Use grid search to avoid missing spots where terrain changes. Investigation Support Team. Interview witnesses at the visitor center and trailhead. Check if Daniel asked park staff for trail information yesterday. Analyze the photos Daniel sent his wife to determine the angle. Estimate his position around 8 to 9 a.m. Examine footprints around the vehicle and compare them to the type of shoes he might have worn. Inside the ICP tent, a SAR specialist was opening positioning software, entering data on weather, average movement speed by gender and age, and the lost person behavior model. On the screen appeared diverging curves from the LKP like spokes, each line representing a possibility of which direction Daniel might have gone. The temperature at this point reached 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Ranger Monroe noted in the log. Conditions 7:34 a.m. Clear sky, light wind, heat rising quickly. SAR must pull back before 10:30 a.m. if no definite signs are found. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed, then the whole valley vibrated slightly as it skimmed overhead. The ground teams began moving out, each person a tiny dot moving through the sea of golden rock. The initial steps were slow and careful, true SAR style. No running, no rushing, no overlooking, because even a single displaced stone could be a clue. Everyone focused on the task at hand, determining Daniel's direction of travel. No guessing, no wild assumptions, only data, tracks, and facts from the ground. And so, under the intensifying sunlight, the search for Daniel Hart officially entered its first large-scale phase where every stone, every footprint, every patch of shade could hold the answer. As the sun climbed just high enough to turn the golden rock faces into burning orange, Ground Search Alpha Team had already gone nearly half a mile deep into Golden Canyon. The air began heating up in Death Valley's characteristic way. Not a sudden blast, but a suffocating squeeze, as if every breeze carried breath from a gigantic furnace. Even so, SAR kept moving, eyes scanning the smallest disturbances on the ground, because in the desert, any disruption means something. Around 8:12 a.m., Alpha Team member, SAR Specialist Jenna McConnell, stopped abruptly. She knelt down, gently brushing away fine dust from an oval-shaped depression with her hand. "Footprint," Jenna said into the radio. "Male, trail shoe sole. Direction, east-northeast." Ranger Monroe at the ICP heard it and immediately marked the position on the map. This was the first track of the morning, and more importantly, it was not on the main trail. The footprint was about 25 meters off the trail path, a spot very few casual hikers would enter. The terrain here sloped gently. The ground a mix of loose gravel and thin sand, enough to hold a print, but easily erased by wind. That meant the print wasn't too old. Jenna leaned closer, noting the depth of the footprint. Not very deep. indicating the person wasn't carrying heavy load, but with a forward lean, as if walking quickly or off balance. Size approximately 10 to 11. Close to average American male footprint. No return prints. Jenna continued reporting. In Daniel's file, he wore size 10.5 shoes. Not absolute proof, but a match strong enough to raise the priority of the area. Alpha continued tracking the prints. Just 40 meters after the first footprint, the whole team discovered a second sign, and this time much clearer. On a sloping rock face, where the ground shifted from dirt to stone, there was a slide mark about 1.2 meters long. Loose gravel had been pushed downward, exposing freshly scratched smooth rock surface. Could be a foot slip, one member commented, or loss of balance from exhaustion, another said. Jenna bent down, lightly rubbing the slide mark with her fingertip. The newly broken stone fragments were still sharp-edged, a sign the mark happened no more than 24 hours ago. This morning's wind hadn't been strong enough to erase it completely. At the top of the slope, a patch of sand was heavily disturbed, forming an unusual swirling pattern. Feels like someone collapsed here, Jenna said. Could be a fall or trying to brace themselves. The report was immediately sent back to Deputy Alvarez at the ICP. He stood up, pinned 3 more red pins on the map, and circled the area in orange high-probability zone. From the footprint to the slide mark, both the distance and direction matched the movement path of someone leaving the trail. Meanwhile, the investigation support team was assigned to re-examine Daniel's Ford Escape in the parking lot. Ranger Lewis unlocked the vehicle using the spare key provided by Daniel's wife. He filmed the entire interior before touching anything. No signs of forced entry. No broken glass fragments. No evidence of a struggle inside the vehicle. On the back seat, a pair of flip-flops. In the trunk, a light jacket, a small toolkit, a few ordinary car items. In the glove compartment, Daniel's wallet, missing cash, but cards still there. Vehicle registration. The most notable thing was, the large hiking backpack as described by his wife was not in the vehicle. That meant Daniel had taken it with him when he left the car. And if the footprints belonged to him, then he had entered the trail with the backpack on his back, even though the footprints did not reflect heavy weight. This led to 2 possibilities. 1. Daniel had ditched the backpack somewhere along the way, or 2. The backpack was lighter than normal, not carrying enough water and supplies. Sheriff Alvarez reviewed the vehicle photos on his laptop and said, "No signs of criminal activity. Vehicle intact. Not tampered with. Not ransacked. But going off trail is highly unusual. Experienced hikers don't leave the trail in this area when it's hot." Ranger Nolan nodded. Unless he thought there was a shortcut, or was looking for shade, or got disoriented. Alvarez noted, "Off-trail behavior, red flag. It knows a valley." While the investigation support team examined the vehicle, Alpha Team noticed that below the slide mark was a small slope. They circled down, scanning the area for dropped items, hat, water bottle, map, but nothing. Only a few piles of loose rocks displaced, forming an unclear fall path. Jenna used binoculars to scan farther. The bottom of the slope led to a small, narrow ravine, a type of pocket canyon that easily misleads lost hikers because the flat ground looks deceptively like a path. Possible he continued down there, Jenna said. Alpha reported back to the ICP. Monroe marked another new circle, HPA Zone 2. Bravo team in the Gower Gulch direction also reported no footprints, no fresh slides, no dropped items. This helped narrow the scope. The traces were concentrating in the direction Alpha was heading. By 9:05 a.m., the temperature rose to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind began blowing scorching hot, making the remaining morning time very short. The ICP directed Alpha to continue for another 25 minutes before having to pull back to avoid heat stroke. At the parking lot, Ranger Lewis closed Daniel's vehicle door and covered it with a reflective tarp to prevent heat from destroying evidence. He looked at the silent car in the empty lot and said quietly, "This person walked out, but didn't walk back in." Yes. In Golden Canyon, Alpha Team was still following the smallest signs. Footprints, displaced rocks, disturbed sand. each detail building a possible movement path for Daniel Hart. But it followed no official trail, had no clear logic, and showed no endpoint. It simply led them deeper into terrain that could swallow a person in absolute silence. The search entered a new threshold. There were traces, but no Daniel, and each trace opened more questions than answers. Death Valley's temperature climbed above 104 degrees Fahrenheit when the clock was only 9:30 a.m. Though the available time for ground search teams was running out, the ICP could not wait any longer. As soon as Alpha reported the footprint and slide mark, Sheriff Alvarez ordered activation of the expanded search phase, meaning widening the search grid beyond Golden Canyon to cover dozens of square kilometers around the trace areas. Inside the ICP tent, the topo map was replaced with a large satellite map. With help from Sartopo software, Ranger Monroe divided the search area into a grid of nearly 27 square kilometers, consisting of more than 60 rectangular cells, each coded with numbers and colors by priority level: red, high; orange, medium; yellow, low. The red cells were locations with footprints and terrain prone to disorientation: pocket canyons, rock gullies, steep slopes, and rare shaded spots. The dog unit from Bishop K9 search team was mobilized. A white SUV pulled up in front of the ICP, carrying two specialist search dogs, Sable and Orion. They were trained to scent human trails in dry, hot environments. But even so, Death Valley was a major challenge. Scents easily disperse or get burned by the heat. The handler let Sable sniff Daniel's hat taken from his vehicle. The dog immediately perked its ears, tensed, and marked the scent. But following it in the desert was another matter. Sable led the handler team toward the slide mark Alpha had found, but then circled back. The scent trail weakened rapidly under the hot, dry wind. At the same time, the thermal drone team was deployed into the sky. 3 drones with high-temperature cameras began scanning in a zigzag pattern from Golden Canyon to the edge of Badlands Loop. Screens at the ICP displayed patches of cool blue rock interspersed with hot yellow points of sun-absorbing surfaces. Any red spot indicating body heat would be flagged for ground teams to check. But in the first morning, the drones detected no suspicious heat signatures. High overhead, the NPS helicopter flew slowly over the ridges. From the radio came, "No shirt, no backpack, no movement, only a few small shaded areas but no one inside." Intense stayed. The crew continued scanning a second time, then a third, still nothing different. In the ICP, a criminal analyst from Inyo County Sheriff was brought in to assist with building a movement model. Though not yet treating this as a criminal case, law enforcement still applied behavioral investigation techniques to analyze the path, especially since the victim showed signs of going off trail. On the laptop screen, the analyst set up movement hypothesis. If Daniel suffered heat stroke, movement often becomes unstable, with a tendency to head downhill seeking easier breathing. If in panic, often turns into side branches, mistaking them for exits. If seeking shade, will move into rock crevices or mountain faces with better cover. If he fell, likely continued crawling toward the lowest point of the terrain. The analyst projected all potential movement paths onto the map, creating a network of diverging curves spreading from the LKP. These lines were overlaid on the grid to determine which cells to search first. Areas with high overlap, where multiple hypothetical paths intersected, were upgraded from orange to red. While SAR expanded the search grid, the investigation team simultaneously began checking factors outside the scene. Deputy Alvarez called the 2 nearest gas stations: Furnace Creek Fuel Station, Stovepipe Wells General Store. Neither location recorded Daniel after he entered the park. No camera captured the Ford Escape leaving the area. This further reinforced the hypothesis that he never left Death Valley. Next, traffic cameras along Highway 190 and Badwater Road were checked. The system recorded several vehicles around the same time Daniel arrived at the park, but most had departed before 2 p.m. Only a few white SUVs and RVs remained until late afternoon. The ICP logged all license plates for analysis, though there were no direct signs of connection. Back at the scene, Alpha Team continued following the footprint direction. But gradually, the prints became fainter as the hot wind began blowing, erasing what remained on the ground. After another 30 minutes, They had to withdraw because the temperature exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. SAR was ordered back to the ICP to regroup and prepare for a late afternoon or next morning session. Alpha reported over radio. No new visual evidence. No items, no clothing, no water bottle. Bravo team also reported, Gower Gulch, low area, clear. No new movement signs. Inside the ICP tent, Monroe logged. 09:58 a.m. Search grid phase 1 completed. No new findings. Heat threshold reached. All ground teams returning. Alvarez stood in front of the map, arms crossed, staring at the red grid stretching all the way to the edge of the Badlands. If he kept going off trail, he said, we'll have to double the grid size tomorrow morning. No one responded. Everyone understood. Each time the search grid expanded, the chances of finding the victim hydrated and still mobile dropped significantly. But no one was allowed to give up, especially when there were footprints, a slide mark, and disturbed sand. The traces were sparse but clear. Daniel had moved, and he moved alone. Both the SAR and investigation units knew the first morning's window had nearly closed. But it was the unusual silence of Death Valley at 10 a.m. when the ground felt like hot metal that made them realize the search would soon need to go beyond standard procedure. For now, the only thing they could do was widen the grid, work more precisely, and wait until the temperature dropped enough to resume tracking. Death Valley temperatures in the 3 days after Daniel went missing all exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. With each morning starting at Furnace Creek, the SAR team gathered again under the white ICP tent, checked water supplies, checked GPS units, rolled call, then headed out. And with each midday, they withdrew from the desert exhausted, clothes soaked in sweat but drying instantly as the heat sucked away moisture the moment it appeared. But no matter how wide they expanded the search grid, every cell remained empty. One by one, teams reported the same. No visual contact, no clothing, no pack, no water bottle, no new tracks. The initial footprints Alpha found were erased by wind in just one night. The rock slide mark became an isolated clue with no continuation. Thermal drones continuously scanned wide areas, but the only heat signatures they detected were from rock strips heating up under the sun. Helicopters circled over sharp ridges, Gower Gulch, Badlands Loop, and returned with the same report, nothing. By the fourth day, the dog unit showed similar results. Human scent in the desert was already faint, but when temperatures exceeded 115 degrees Fahrenheit, scent detection became nearly impossible. The dog Sable panted heavily, tongue bright red, and was ordered back to the rest station early to avoid heat shock. This left the ICP without one of its most important tools for confirming Daniel's actual direction. On the morning of the fifth day, Sheriff Alvarez stood before the repeatedly edited grid map, expanded, narrowed, then expanded again. He took a deep breath, eyes tired from lack of sleep. We have covered 87% of the feasible area within a 15-kilometer radius from the LKP, he said, and 40% in the extended zones. Ranger Monroe stayed silent. Everyone understood what those numbers meant. If Daniel was still out there, he was either lying in a crevice too narrow to spot from above, or had completely lost the ability to move days ago. On the afternoon of the fifth day, NPS, National Park Service, and Inyo County Sheriff held an operational summary, the required status review after large-scale searches lasting multiple days. In the small meeting room behind the visitor center, folding chairs were lined up, the whiteboard covered in dense notes. A heavy atmosphere filled the room. Alvarez began. We have deployed a total of 64 SAR personnel, 9 ground teams, 3 dog units, 3 thermal drones, 2 helicopter flights per day, and over 310 hours of ground search. We have scanned a total of 43.6 square kilometers of terrain. Not a single new trace. Monroe's senior ranger colleague from across the table added, no signs of criminal activity, no struggle marks, no dropped items, no GPS signal, no phone pings since the first day. The conclusion hung in the room so long that everyone could hear the air conditioning struggling against the heat. Finally, the superintendent of Death Valley National Park said what everyone knew but no one wanted to admit. The likelihood that he succumbed to dehydration or exposure is very high. The word death tightened the room. There was no body, no traces, but Death Valley had made many people vanish without leaving anything behind. The terrain here is so vast that if someone falls into a narrow crevice or lies under a rock overhang gradually covered by wind-blown sand, a person can disappear forever. Sheriff Alvarez lowered his eyes to the documents in front of him. The large-scale search will end at 6 p.m. today. After that, the case will be moved to missing, presumed dead status. Presumed dead, presumed deceased is the ritual step that SAR hates the most. It is not a declaration of giving up, but an acknowledgement that the environment has exceeded human survival limits. After the meeting, Ranger Lewis returned to the Golden Canyon parking lot to complete the final procedures related to Daniel's Ford escape. The afternoon sun beat straight down on the empty lot, making the vehicle's metal hot like a furnace. Lewis put on gloves, opened the door, took a few more photos, then carefully sealed the doors with forensic tape. A specialized tow truck was called in. Lewis stood watching the Ford escape, always the place Daniel first stepped into when starting his trip, now being towed away from the lot, rolling slowly over the scorching pavement before disappearing onto Highway 190, heading toward Inyo County's evidence storage facility. The vehicle was placed in hold, cold case storage status, sealed and waiting for the future. If new developments arise, forensics will work on it again. If not, it will sit untouched for years in storage. Back at the ICP, Ranger Monroe let out a long breath before doing the last task of the day, closing the active status of the case. In the NPS system, the file was changed from active search to inactive, missing, presumed dead. The sheriff's side updated similarly, cold case, missing person. A new page appeared on the computer screen. Case status, cold. Reason, no evidence of life. No contact. Search exhausted. No one in the ICP spoke after those words appeared. They only looked at each other with the familiar gaze of people who had witnessed too many desert disappearances. Not due to crime, not due to supernatural mystery, but due to the sheer harshness of nature, a nature that is merciless, unforgiving, and never answers the question, why? As the sun set and deep red spread across Furnace Creek, the ICP began to dismantle. Equipment was packed away. The whiteboard wiped clean. Radios turned down. Only the white tent remained standing under the darkening sky. On paper, the Daniel Hart missing person case had officially entered its cold period, but the silence of Death Valley never foretells anything, and no one could claim that file would stay dormant forever. 2 months after Daniel Hart's file was pushed into missing presumed dead status, Furnace Creek returned to the normal rhythm of Death Valley. Blinding sun, stinging wind, occasional groups of tourists stopping to take photos under the Death Valley National Park sign. The story of Daniel's disappearance gradually faded from tourists' memories, but it still smoldered in the local community, especially among the rangers, who carried a sense of failure every time they thought about a case where they couldn't bring someone home. Then, on an early October morning when the weather had cooled, the ICP buzzed again with an emergency call. A group of German tourists trekking near Panamint Dunes, about 40 kilometers as the crow flies from Golden Canyon, reported seeing human bones scattered in the sand, sun-bleached, faded, and clearly not recent. When the information reached Ranger Supervisor Klein, the first words out of his mouth were, "We have to get there right away." NPS immediately dispatched a quick response team of 3 rangers and 1 paramedic to the location the tourists had marked via GPS. Panamint Dunes is almost completely isolated from main trails. Reaching it requires crossing desolate desert, with nothing but sand and rock in all directions. No shade, no water sources. That area was not a logical route for any missing person from Golden Canyon. But Death Valley had seen even less logical paths. No one dared rule out the possibility that Daniel had gone farther than predicted. When the ranger team arrived, the scene was both strange and disturbing. Amid dunes rising like walls, bones were scattered in 2 clusters. A few leg fragments, part of a rib cage, and an arm bone bleached white by the sun. No clothing, no shoes, no backpack, just bones and sand. Ranger Hayes took photos, marked coordinates, then quietly said, "The decomposition. It's been many years." The paramedic double-checked. Not recent, not related to the time frame of Daniel's disappearance. But even though the Rangers understood that, they still had to report fully. This is Death Valley, where every time you search for one missing person, sometimes you find someone else. The remains were collected using forensic techniques to avoid disturbing the scene. All bones were placed in evidence bags and transferred to the Inyo County lab for identification. News spread quickly just hours after the Rangers left Panamint Dunes. Local social media began mentioning the possibility that Daniel Hart has been found. Travel forums shared the location of the bone discovery, attaching images of helicopters that had once searched for Daniel in nearby areas. Daniel's wife, when called by Sheriff Alvarez with the preliminary notification per protocol, nearly stopped breathing. No one said anything definitive, only that human bones have been found and forensic identification is needed. But that uncertainty was enough to make the family relive the entire haunting month of the search. 3 days later, the forensics lab completed the initial analysis. The results immediately shifted the case in a new direction. The skeleton belonged to a male, estimated age 30 to 40, height approximately 5 feet, 10 inches to 6 feet. It sounded too similar to Daniel. Male, 34 years old, 6 feet tall. Rumors exploded even stronger, but forensics did not conclude yet. Because the bones had endured extreme temperatures, only DNA from the bone marrow could be used. The sample had been sent to a specialized lab in Sacramento. While waiting, Sheriff Alvarez and Ranger Monroe reviewed the entire area map again. Based on every possible movement simulation from Golden Canyon, the chance of Daniel traveling nearly 40 kilometers was virtually zero. For a dehydrated person to cover that distance was illogical. But in missing persons investigations, illogical is never completely ruled out. Finding human bones in the same park, even dozens of kilometers away, still forced them to treat it as a potentially related clue. 4 days later, the DNA results came back. Alvarez called Monroe to the sheriff's office to hear it at the same time. When the forensic email opened, the first line appeared. DNA sample not matched to Hart, Daniel. So, it was not Daniel. The news was immediately sent to his family so they would not have to wait longer. But instead of closure, the matter opened another door. An unidentified male body in the desert. No ID, no clothing, no missing person report. No clear link to any event. Inyo County immediately named the new file Death Valley John Doe, Panamint Dunes remains. But what made the situation complicated was the timing and circumstances of Daniel's disappearance. The two cases were unrelated in time, but occurred in the same vast desert region. Many rangers began wondering, was this just coincidence, or was Death Valley hiding more than they thought? The desert forensics team returned to Panamint to search for additional bones or items. They found a small bone fragment about 50 meters from the original location, indicating the remains may have been disturbed by wildlife. This made determining cause of death and identity even harder. At the old ICP, now temporarily re-erected to support the John Doe case, Ranger Monroe stood in front of the map, looking at the two marked points, Golden Canyon, Daniel's LKP, and Panamint Dunes, John Doe location, nearly half the park apart. One person died here. One person vanished here. And both were men in their 30 to 40 age range. The Daniel Hart case had already been closed as a cold case, but now there was an unidentified body in the same area. New questions emerged, not about Daniel, but about the bigger picture of Death Valley. In this desert expanse, everything is always distorted by sand and sun. But strange discoveries like this often lead to one truth. When a disappearance remains unsolved, any new find, even if not directly related, can force initial assumptions to be reconsidered. While Inyo County was still pouring resources into analyzing the Death Valley John Doe skeleton, completely unexpected information suddenly appeared, and it forced the entire Daniel Hart file to be reopened from scratch, even though it had been closed less than 2 months earlier. This turnaround began with what seemed like a routine report. an FBI financial crimes analyst in Los Angeles, at the request of Sheriff Alvarez, reviewed all of Daniel's bank data for the 30 days around the disappearance date. This was standard procedure for missing persons cases suspected of criminal elements. But since Daniel's file had been concluded, presumed dead, it was just a formality to complete paperwork. No one expected to find anything. But then, on a Tuesday morning, an email from the FBI analyst arrived in the sheriff's inbox with a short subject line: Urgent Suspicious ATM Transaction. When Alvarez opened the attached PDF, he frowned. Right under the section Transactions After Missing Date, a glaring line appeared. Cash withdrawal, $200. Location: ATM near Valley View BLFD, Las Vegas, NV. Time: 4 days after Daniel went missing. Alvarez immediately called Ranger Monroe to the office. The two men looked at each other in disbelief. Daniel couldn't have walked 160 miles through the desert. 4 days after going missing, Monroe said. No water, no gear, no traces. Then who withdrew money using his card? Alvarez replied. The strangest part was yet to come. The FBI analyst had extracted the ATM camera footage from the transaction time. The video was not perfectly clear. ATM cameras never are, but clear enough to identify the figure of the man withdrawing money. Height: approximately 5 feet, 9 to 6 feet buried. Wearing a dark-colored hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, face almost completely obscured. Normal gait, no signs of staggering or exhaustion. The most valuable detail was the image of the person's left hand area. On the wrist, there was no deep sunburn line, a characteristic commonly seen in people who move a lot in the desert. Do you think that's Daniel? Monroe asked. Alvarez shook his head. The camera is too bad, but my gut says it doesn't look like him. Monroe was silent for a moment, then said, Or, it does. That pause made the entire room feel a beat colder. 3 possibilities were immediately laid out. 1. Daniel is still alive and withdrew the money himself. That means he did not die in the desert. He left the park without anyone seeing. He went to Las Vegas. This scenario sounded so illogical that the Rangers almost dismissed it right away. But the FBI never rules anything out early. 2. Daniel was taken by someone or coerced, and that person used his card. This was the hypothesis Alvarez took most seriously. A person goes missing in the desert, and then the card shows up in Vegas, he said. I've seen cases of human trafficking or property theft. 3. Daniel's card was cloned. All it takes is someone having the magnetic strip data from the card to create a duplicate and withdraw money like the card owner. It was the third possibility that opened a new investigation direction. The FBI analyst contacted Daniel's bank and received a notable response. The ATM used was on Nevada's list of skimmer hotspots, one of the locations previously found to have card-skimming devices attached. The bank expert explained, the machines were rechecked after the incident, but we cannot be certain whether the person withdrawing used the real card or a clone. If the magnetic strip data was stolen earlier, for example at a gas station, then the clone card would process completely legally. Monroe, hearing that, immediately remembered. Daniel had bought water at the general store counter in Furnace Creek, but the gas station before that, on the way from Bakersfield to Death Valley, was the more noteworthy place. The card could have been skimmed before entering the park, Monroe said. Could anyone clone it like that? Alvarez asked. Not anyone, but professional criminals could. The information, ATM Las Vegas transaction 4 days after disappearance, was immediately stamped priority evidence in the file. It did not prove Daniel was alive, but it also did not prove he was dead. It brought everything back to an uncomfortable balance. Not definitely negative, not definitely positive. More importantly, the FBI analyst had run a further tracing algorithm. That withdrawal had never been flagged by the bank because the bank did not view it as unusual. Daniel's credit card had not been frozen since the missing person processing came later. This meant the transaction was not blocked. The bank allowed the use. The system had no alert flag. If Daniel was alive, this was intentional behavior. If someone else used the card, that person was not afraid of being traced. Alvarez leaned toward the second possibility. The person withdrawing knew the ATM camera quality was low. They wore a hat, covered their face, didn't turn toward the lens. This doesn't look like the panicked behavior of someone who just survived 4 days in the desert. Monroe asked a question no one could answer. But if that's not Daniel, then where is Daniel? The investigation, which had been closed, now had to be reopened, but in a completely different direction. Not just searching for a missing person, but searching for the person who used the missing persons card. And the appearance of Las Vegas, the city where everything blends together, every trace easily evaporates, turned the Daniel Hart case from here into an entirely different phase. Daniel might be dead. Daniel might be alive. Daniel might be held by someone. No possibility was ruled out. 3 years passed since the day the Daniel Hart file was closed, with the cold words, missing, presumed dead. His Ford Escape sat gathering dust in Inyo County's evidence storage, while the SAR reports, drone data, dog unit logs, helicopter searches, had all yellowed with time. Though occasionally someone still asked, was Daniel ever found? The answer was always the evasive silence of those who had worked the case. But in early spring, the Inyo County Sheriff's Office had an important personnel change. Detective Rachel Kim, 36 years old, was transferred from Los Angeles after successfully solving multiple complex federal missing persons cases. With her deep digital analysis skills, she was assigned to long-standing cold cases, among which stood out Case DV-20-251947. Missing hiker. Hart. Daniel. On her first day accessing the file, Rachel immediately recognized this was not a standard disappearance. In the nearly 4-inch thick case box, there were all kinds of reports. SAR logs from the 6-day search SAR, thermal drone data, photos of the footprint and slide mark, the presumed dead conclusion report, Panamint Dunes remains file, John Doe, DNA exclusion analysis CRAM, Las Vegas ATM report, faded cell tower logs from 3 years earlier. Rachel opened each document, reading from start to finish, her expression growing increasingly serious. This cannot be called a natural disappearance, she said quietly, alone in the room. There are too many variables that were overlooked. In particular, one detail made her pause the longest. The ATM transaction in Las Vegas 4 days after Daniel vanished. This cannot be ignored, Rachel muttered. It changes the entire assumption about the time of death. But there was something that made her even more suspicious than the ATM transaction. Cell tower logs. Over the past 3 years, no one had questioned this data. It only recorded one single line. Last ping, 2:13 p.m. Golden Canyon sector, weak signal. And the entire SAR team at the time had relied completely on that log entry, treating it as the sole source of information to determine Daniel's direction. If that ping was wrong, the entire SAR search grid that day had been placed in the wrong area. Why did Rachel suspect it? Because, when reading the footnote in the carrier's report, she noticed something unusual. The day Daniel went missing was exactly during the period when Verizon was upgrading cell towers in the southern part of the park. In the small, hard-to-read note at the bottom of the page was a line almost forgotten. Communication interruptions may affect precision. Logs subject to partial error. Oh my God, Rachel whispered. Hundreds of reports and no one noticed this line? She immediately called the Verizon Security Division, requesting all raw tower logs from the day Daniel went missing, including unprocessed data, error pings, low-level packet logs, and internal station status files from that day. Much of this data had never been examined, not included in the main file because no one thought it might be necessary. The person on the other end asked again, "You want raw data? It's several gigabytes, unstructured, and not guaranteed to be readable." "Send it anyway," Rachel said. "I'll handle it." And that was exactly what set Rachel apart from the previous investigators. She did not trust processed reports. To her, raw data was the only thing that didn't lie. When the data arrived, Rachel pulled her specialized laptop onto the desk and opened the mobile signal analysis software she had used in federal cases. This was software reserved for digital forensics experts. It could reconstruct coverage models, measure interference, separate ghost pings, and backtrace coordinates based on cell timestamp traffic. On the screen appeared thousands of lines of characters. 0011. Tower switch error. 0012. Packet dropped. 0013. Handoff attempt failed. 0014. Sector echo. Duplicate ping. Rachel frowned. Just as I thought. The data that day was severely corrupted. This meant the 2:13 p.m. ping that SAR used as the search basis could be completely wrong. It could have come from a tower many kilometers away from Golden Canyon, or from the completely opposite direction. If true, the search teams 3 years earlier had gone in the wrong direction from the very first minute. Rachel wrote in her notebook, Action Item 1. Reconstruct Daniel's last movement using raw tower logs plus ATM timeline. Then she called Alvarez. I need to re-access the Daniel file, including the sealed vehicle and all phone data prior to the disappearance. Alvarez sounded slightly surprised. This case has been cold for 3 years. Do you think Daniel is still alive? Rachel replied briefly, I think we never truly knew which direction he went. In the days that followed, Rachel rebuilt Daniel's entire movement using the most modern digital forensic methods, analyzing overlapping signals between cell towers, determining wind direction and interference levels affecting the signal, cross-referencing raw pings with terrain maps, using real-time trajectory reconstruction model. No one before had ever examined the Daniel case with these techniques simply because the technology 3 years earlier was not advanced enough. In the old reports, everything stopped at the footprint, slide mark, and dehydration assumptions. But for Rachel, this case was not just footprints in the sand. It was a movement pattern with missing data. And if she could reconstruct that pattern, she could understand. Had Daniel actually left Golden Canyon? Which direction did he go? Was the 2:13 p.m. ping really from his phone? And how could the journey 4 days later to Las Vegas have happened? Rachel turned to the last page in her notebook and added a new line. If the ping direction is wrong, the entire assumption of death in the desert could collapse. It did not prove Daniel was alive, but it opened a door that no one had touched in 3 years. Daniel might not have died in Death Valley, not in Golden Canyon, and perhaps never went in the direction SAR had searched. The raw data from Verizon turned Rachel's laptop screen into a matrix of noise, thousands of lines of error characters, dropped packets, duplicate pings, and continuous handoff fail records. To any traditional investigator, it was just a pile of meaningless data. But in Rachel's eyes, it was like a charred draft of a story that could still be read if you knew how to piece it together. The very next morning, Rachel contacted a senior Verizon network engineer named Evan Laird, who had worked with her on a missing persons case in San Diego. Evan arrived at the sheriff's office in Independence with a powerful laptop and 3D coverage modeling software, something the SAR team 3 years earlier did not have. When Evan looked through the entire raw logs, he only said one short sentence. "Oh, this is a big mistake." Rachel replied, "I thought so too. Let's get started." Reconstructing the 3D coverage map of the disappearance day, Evan connected his laptop to the large screen. The background was the Death Valley desert terrain map. Rock canyons, mountain slopes, deep valleys, all rugged like a model cast from molten metal. He inputted all the raw logs into the automated analysis software. The computer ran algorithms to reconstruct signal direction, reflection angles, interference levels, and ghost ping possibilities. After nearly 40 minutes of processing, the complete 3D model appeared. Cell towers marked with green dots, signals spreading like deformed spheres. Areas blocked by mountains turned into gray patches. Blind spots shown in black bland. Rachel leaned forward to observe, her brows slightly furrowed. "This doesn't look like the map SAR used 3 years ago." Evan nodded. "Not at all. The system was undergoing upgrades at the time, causing signals to reflect off rock walls near Golden Canyon." Result: the 2:13 p.m. ping that SAR believed came from Golden Canyon was actually not in that area's coverage. That ping, now re-identified, was a ghost ping from the signal bouncing off a mountain wall to the southeast. The true location of the final ping, a deep canyon Never searched. Here, Evan said, zooming in on the map. A dark, deep, winding canyon area appeared at the edge of the screen. That zone was outside the range SAR scanned in the initial search phase. Not due to lack of manpower. Not due to oversight, but because the cell tower log at the time was wrong. SAR had relied on the 2:13 p.m. ping to deploy teams westward-northwest, but the new model showed that ping actually originated from the opposite direction. East-southeast, near the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, land boundary. Rachel asked, "How far is it from the LKP to the true ping location?" Evan entered the command, and the software calculated. About 9.4 kilometers as the crow flies. If Daniel went off trail, it could be 12 to 14 kilometers. Monroe, who was watching the process, shook his head. Impossible. A person without water, suffering heat stroke, couldn't go that far in a few hours. Rachel replied, "Impossible by SAR logic. But we're looking at real data, not standard behavior." She did not claim Daniel had made it there. But the 3D model showed, if his phone was still active at 2:13 p.m., it was in that area, not Golden Canyon. A heavy silence fell over the room. Deadly blind spot. The area never searched in the 6-day SAR operation. The zone the model pointed to was in what insiders call a dead shadow zone, a type of canyon with vertical walls completely blocking signals. Extremely difficult to access terrain, usually not on main trail routes. No shade except small natural caves. History of missing persons but rarely found. The SAR team 3 years earlier never entered this area. Not because of carelessness, but because the faulty ping system made them believe Daniel was in the opposite direction. Rachel stared intently at the canyon zone on the map. "What do we call it?" she asked Evan. "Blind spot," Evan answered. "Literally." Rachel nodded. "Deadly." She took a red pen and circled the area on the map. On the whiteboard behind her, she wrote in large letters, "Priority Investigative Zone 1. Southeast Shadow Canyon. Not SAR, but Investigative Survey." Ranger Monroe looked at Rachel with hesitation. "Do you want to reopen SAR? No one has entered that area in 3 years. The terrain is steep, loose rock, some drops you can't climb back from." Rachel shook her head. "Not SAR. I don't want to send a rescue team looking for a body. This is no longer a natural disaster case. We need to investigate, not search." The term she used was a new concept in the field. Investigative Survey Special. Investigative survey. Not to rescue someone, not to recover remains, but to determine the truth. This survey had clear objectives. Verify the final ping location belonged to Daniel's phone change. Look for signs of human presence in the blind spot area. Search for items, bottle caps, fabric pieces, backpack, hat, map cert. Check rock crevices and rare water collection points. Assess the possibility of exiting the area toward Las Vegas. Rachel said, "This zone has never been scanned. If Daniel or his phone was ever here, it changes the entire case file." Monroe looked at the map, silent for a few seconds, then said, "If you're right, 3 years ago we searched in the wrong direction." "Not your fault," Rachel replied. "It was the data's fault." Internal report sent to sheriff and NPS. That afternoon, Rachel completed a 9-page report, sent directly to the Inyo County Sheriff and the Superintendent of Death Valley National Park. On the first page, the conclusion was bolded. Ping 2:13 p.m. False positive. Actual location outside SAR search zone. New zone identified. Sheriff Alvarez finished reading, set the report down on the desk, his face serious. "So, the entire disappearance could have happened in an area we never touched?" Rachel replied, "Not confirmed yet. But the data points to that possibility." Alvarez shook his head. "We have to go see." Rachel pointed to the map. "I propose forming a special investigative survey team, not SAR. It needs forensic mapping, digital technicians, and we go meter by meter." Alvarez nodded. "You have approval to proceed." With one red mark on the map, and a ping once considered meaningless, Rachel had opened an entirely new investigation direction. A deep, dark canyon region never stepped in during the days searching for Daniel Hart. That deadly blind spot had now become the focal point of the entire case. 3 days after the sheriff approved the special investigative survey, the office received an email from a group of 3 hikers from San Diego. They knew nothing about the Daniel Hart case. They only sent it because this thing looked too weird, so we're reporting it to the Rangers. Attached to the email were 4 phone photos. Deep in a canyon, sunlight slanting down, making the sand sparkle blindingly, but most prominent was a round steel pipe about 20 to 25 centimeters in diameter, protruding from the sand only about 2 handspans high. On top of the pipe was a thin metal mesh, like a ventilation pipe, and a few steps away was a dust-covered solar panel, struggling to absorb the harsh desert light. The hikers wrote in the email, "We thought it was some weather monitoring equipment or something, but it looks not standard NPS. No markings, no warning signs, placed in a spot that doesn't seem scientific, hidden right in the rock crevice. No one would see it unless they got lost." The moment they read the email, Monroe and Rachel immediately looked at each other. Blind spot, deep canyon, an unmarked man-made structure, right in an area no one ever passes through. Rachel requested, "Send the coordinates immediately, and get the group's permission to use the photos as evidence." 30 minutes later, Jackson plotted the coordinates on the map. The red marker fell right inside Priority Investigative Zone 1, the blind spot they had just identified from the cell ping at 2:13 p.m. Rachel gritted her teeth. Not coincidence. It can't be. Ranger Miguel Alvarez inspected the scene, body cam recording every second. Ranger Miguel Alvarez, the most experienced at the Furnace Creek area, was assigned to check it out. He wore a body cam, carried water, a shovel, GPS kit, and radio. The trip took nearly 4 hours, mostly because the terrain was more treacherous than expected. Loose rocks, narrow paths, many spots requiring hand climbing. The body cam captured heavy breathing as Alvarez climbed down into the canyon bottom, where sunlight never reaches the floor. The heat still rose suffocatingly. When he reached the coordinates, the steel pipe protruding from the sand appeared exactly like in the photo. He touched the edge of the pipe cold. Not hot like metal exposed to sun. Not logical, Alvarez said into the radio. This thing isn't absorbing heat. Either it has a ventilation system from below. He used the shovel to dig sand around the pipe. Fine sand slid down both sides, revealing a longer section of pipe going straight down. Digging deeper about half a meter, the shovel hit something hard. A flat metal surface. He brushed off the dust, angled the camera down. It was a gray steel hatch, with edged rims and small scratch marks as if it had been opened or closed many times. Alvarez immediately stopped, stood up abruptly. He did not open the hatch. He was not allowed to, even though he sensed it could be opened. He said into the radio, "I confirm. This is not legal NPS or BLM equipment. This is a concealed metal structure. It has a vent pipe, solar panel, and steel hatch. I emphasize, this case very likely involves criminal activity." Rachel cross-checked the coordinates, and the match made the whole room go still. When Alvarez sent the GPS data back, Rachel plotted the point on the map. It took exactly 3 seconds to see the truth. It was a precise match with the coordinates of the final cell ping. The silence in the room was only broken by the hum of the computer fan. Monroe leaned over to look at the screen, gently shaking his head as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Daniel couldn't have stumbled here by accident. Impossible. This isn't on any path. Rachel didn't answer, just pulled up the photo of the solar panel from the hiker's email and zoomed in. Dust-covered solar panel, hand-assembled edges, cables running down into the sand. Not survey equipment. Not NPS. Not BLM. Not any research project they knew of. Rachel said slowly, "If what's under that steel hatch is a bunker, and if the vent pipe supplies air to someone below, then we're looking at an unauthorized man-made structure. A place that could be used to hold someone." Monroe asked, "You mean Daniel?" Rachel replied, "I'm not saying anything. I'm only saying Daniel's final cell ping originated from this exact spot. Verification with BLM and NPS, no one ever permitted this to exist." The sheriff immediately called the BLM Southern Nevada field office. Rachel sent the photos and coordinates. Response came back within 20 minutes. No permitted structures, projects, ventilation pipes, or power equipment exist in that area. NPS responded similarly. No research, no weather monitoring devices, no geological survey programs at that location. So, what was this thing? Who put it there? And most importantly, why was it at the exact spot matching Daniel Hart's final signal? Rachel opened the Las Vegas ATM file on the desk. The photo of the hooded man with his face in shadow. She looked at it, then back at the map, a thought flashing through her mind, but she didn't voice it. Warrant prepared case shifts to suspected criminal offense. Based on the field inspection results, the matching cell ping coordinates, information from BLM, NPS, and the presence of an illegal underground structure. Rachel drafted a federal search warrant for deeper access to the steel hatch. The warrant contents included authority to excavate and open the metal structure, authority to use forensic mapping equipment tapper, authority to collect samples and evidence, authority to film and record with specialized devices, authority to deploy drones inside the canyon. The warrant was submitted to a federal judge in the Eastern District of California. Legal basis: suspicion of structure related to unlawful imprisonment, intentional concealment of a victim, or other serious criminal acts. Sheriff Alvarez signed last. From now on, we're no longer investigating a disappearance. We're investigating a crime. Rachel stood silent for a few seconds, eyes fixed on the vent pipe photo on the screen. Under that thin layer of sand could be what they had been searching for over 3 years. Or worse, something they were never mentally prepared to see. But she didn't say it. She only repeated one sentence. Prepare the team. The dawn that day had not yet illuminated the canyon bottom when the interagency team arrived. Detective Rachel Kim, Ranger Miguel Alvarez, 2 forensic technicians, a BLM investigator, and an FBI representative. The steel hatch was now cordoned off with yellow tape, marked with evidence numbers, and surrounded by chalk-outlined footprints to ensure chain of custody. Rachel stood at the edge of the pit, wearing nitrile gloves. "Pry the hatch open," she ordered. Miguel and 1 technician used a specialized crowbar inserted into the steel edge seam. When they levered hard, a clunk sounded, the sound of metal hitting hidden hinges. The smell of hot iron mixed with sand rose up. The hatch lifted slightly, then opened fully, revealing a pitch-black void directly below. Flashlights were turned on. Beams pierced into the earth, illuminating a steel ladder leading straight down. The steps were old, rusted, with slide marks on the edges, as if someone had climbed up and down many times. Rachel spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb something inside. "This isn't a temporary dugout. This is intentional construction." Miguel descended first, body cam recording every step. When he reached the bottom, the flashlight beam swept across the walls, then stopped. No one spoke for several seconds. An underground room, and all traces of a human once living here. The bunker was not large, only about 4 meters by 5 meters, high enough to stand. But everything inside showed it was not an emergency shelter. An iron bed bolted to the floor, not a camping cot or foldable bed. It was permanently fixed, with rust marks at the 4 corner bolts. Thin, old, torn mattress, looking as if it had been pulled or yanked repeatedly. Chains hooked to the wall, 2 chains, each about 1.5 meters long, ending in large shackle rings. The chains had both fresh and old scratch marks, indicating repeated use. Wear marks on the floor. One area of the cement floor was gouged as if a heavy object had been dragged, or a person pulled. Makeshift toilet. A plastic bucket with a seat lid, the kind used in temporary cabins. Inside were still toilet paper and old plastic bags, proving long-term use. Lighting system, connected to the solar panel above. An electrical cable ran from the ceiling up toward the vent pipe. LED bulbs crudely attached to the walls, some still faintly glowing despite thick dust. Rachel recorded on the scene voice recorder. Semi-professional level structure. Not resembling a survival shelter, resembles an illegal detention facility. The dense tally marks on the wall counting days. When the light moved to the left wall, the whole team froze. On it were hundreds of vertical and diagonal marks, grouped in sets of 5. like the way people count days when imprisoned. Miguel muttered, "At least 300, 400, maybe more." A forensic technician took macro photos of each group of marks, some marks deep, some faint, some overlapping older ones. Rachel noted, "These are not marks from someone stopping by temporarily. These are from someone who lived or was held for an extended period." Evidence scattered signs of a prolonged isolation. In the corner of the room, placed on a wooden crate, were items that suddenly made the air heavier. Empty canned food. Beans, soup, canned meat. 4 5-gallon water jugs, 2 completely empty. A partially used roll of duct tape. Nylon rope of the type used for binding. A torn shirt, ownership unclear. A thin blanket with dark streaks, possibly dried blood. Forensics immediately numbered them. V1, V2, V3, each one. Rachel did not take her eyes off the evidence pile. She pointed to the water jugs. No one would voluntarily live here for fun. This is a forced survival pattern. A separate locked room where no natural light ever reaches. Miguel shone the light at the far wall. There was a small steel door, locked with a sliding bolt latch. No handle on the inside, only on the outside. Inner cannot exit. Outer cannot enter. Rachel commented. Miguel slid the bolt. The heavy door opened. Inside the small room was pitch black, like a pit. The smell of rust and faint odor wafted out. When the flashlight beamed in, the entire team almost collectively held their breath. On the cement floor, an old brown-black bloodstain spread in a semicircle shape. Next to it, a men's shoe. Size 10, dusty but still intact in shape. No one spoke. The technician immediately collected samples. And in the right corner, a broken phone. Screen cracked wide open. Rachel bent down very slowly. "Don't touch it. Let forensics handle it." The technician placed it in an evidence bag, labeled V48. Rachel asked, "Can it be powered on?" "Don't know. But the chip and SIM card may be recoverable." High-level crime scene. The bunker becomes the investigation's focal point. Within 30 minutes, the bunker became a scene processed at the highest level. 3D camera, scanning the entire room layout of Ola. Laser grid mapping, building positions of each piece of evidence. DNA swabs from chains, bed, hatch, ladder, handrails, fingerprint checks on ventilation fan and door eat. Soil and sand samples collected for sediment analysis. Forensic photos of each group of tally marks. A forensic technician said quietly, "If someone was held here for a long time, they lived very close to death." Rachel did not respond. She looked at the marks on the wall. They were so dense they seemed to want to cover the entire room. Each mark was a day of existence, a day of counting, a day of waiting. "Finally," she said, voice low but clear, "this bunker has been operational for a long time, and the last person here may have still been alive when brought in." In the flashlight beams reflecting off the fine sand at their feet, no one dared say another word. They only knew one thing. The Daniel Hart missing person file had completely entered a different territory where footprints in the sand were no longer the most terrifying clue. The federal lab in Fresno received all the evidence from the bunker just one day after the scene was collected. They stamped high-priority potential long-term captivity site on every container. The DNA, fingerprint, geological, and digital experts worked 3 consecutive shifts. None of them knew who Daniel Hart was. All they knew was an illegal bunker in the desert with signs of holding living people for extended periods. This was the kind of case where no mistakes were allowed. Rachel arrived at the lab early in the morning, standing by the glass door watching as technicians opened the evidence bags. Chains, bed, mattress, empty cans, blanket, torn shirt, shoe, broken phone, each item moved to a separate station. Everything entered the second phase of the forensic process, the part where the first answers would appear. Mixture profiles, not one person, but many people had been here SSN. The DNA lab prioritized samples from the small back room, where the brown-black dried blood stain and the men's shoe were. Preliminary results came after 12 hours of processing, a complete female DNA profile. An expert told Rachel over the phone, "We ran CODIS, No match to anyone in the national system. Not a person with prior convictions. Not an identified victim in the database. Rachel noted. Female DNA source blood. No CODIS match. Possibly a victim never reported missing. Samples from the chains, bed, mattress, and blanket gave more complex results. Multiple male and female DNA profiles, mixture profiles. Experts had to use software to separate alleles by percentage contribution. Temporary conclusion. At least 2 to 3 male DNA sources. At least 1 female DNA source besides the blood. Signs of repeated contact over a long period. The lead technician explained, "This isn't a situation with one person using the bunker. It's multiple people. We don't know if multiple victims or victims and perpetrator mixed, but clearly, the bunker was active longer than we thought." Rachel gripped her pen tighter. This was no longer a place someone accidentally sheltered. This was a site for holding multiple people over extended time, and no one yet knew who those people were. Fingerprints. Qualified partial prints, but no hit in APHIS. On the vent pipe, steel hatch, bed edge, and steel ladder parts, forensics collected over 40 fingerprints. Many were smudged, slipped, or covered in quartz sand dust, the sharp-edged grains of Death Valley that damage ridge patterns. But 7 partials were qualified for entry into APHIS. Results came back. No APHIS hit. No criminal record match. No match to any fingerprint database files. No match to government or military employees. This shifted the case direction. The bunker operator may never have been arrested, have no biometric records, or wore gloves most of the time, forensics reported. Rachel whispered, "Then who touched those things? And who was chained there?" Geology, dust, sand, and sediment. The bunker had been active for years. BLM sent a forensic geology team to analyze fine dust and sediment in the bunker. They took samples from ladder edges, bed legs, makeshift toilet, floor wear marks, vent pipe, and sand stuck around the tally marks on the wall. Results returned after 72 hours. All dust samples had mineral composition 100% matching the soil unique to the blind spot area. Thermally weathered feldspar, reddish-brown quartz, tiny mica, and high mineral salt ratio, the geologist wrote in the report. No evidence of soil brought in from elsewhere. Dust in the bunker accumulated over multiple hot-cold seasons, indicating the bunker existed and was used for an extended period, at minimum several years. That meant the bunker was not hastily built, not a temporary spot for a few weeks. This was a real operational facility in the remote desert, consecutively for years. Rachel felt a chill down her spine. A bunker operating silently, unknown to anyone, right next to a blind spot where cell signals could not reach. And it was only discovered thanks to a cell ping thought meaningless 3 years earlier. The broken phone identity, IMEI, serial, usage history. Digital forensics separated the cracked phone screen, preserving the mainboard, memory chip, and SIM. They used a specialized extraction device, Celebrite, UFED, to read the elements. After 7 hours, the system displayed information. IMEE, serial model name carrier code, and SIM ID. The technician team handed the report to Rachel in the glass room. "We couldn't power the phone on, but the SIM was once registered. It can be linked to an account, a specific person." Rachel opened the list of missing persons in the California, Nevada, Arizona region over the past 10 years. She searched for any reported lost devices, any matching IMEI, any device with a last ping near Death Valley. The broken phone from the bunker was added to the possible match list. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. This could very well be a clue from the person who was in that room, or the person who ran it. The official file was reclassified from missing person to kidnapping, aggravated assault, long-term confinement. When all the forensic sections were compiled, a joint report over 70 pages long was prepared for submission to the California Attorney General's office. Security Investigation Conclusion Section. The underground bunker shows clear signs of unlawful long-term human confinement. The scene matches elements of kidnapping, assault, coercion, and severe deprivation of liberty. Sheriff Alvarez added his signature to the Daniel Hart file. Case classification change. Missing person criminal investigation. kidnapping and unlawful confinement. The steel hatch was no longer just a steel hatch. The chains were no longer just chains. Each tally mark on the wall was no longer a meaningless scratch. Everything turned into evidence of a heavy truth. Someone had been imprisoned underground there for a very long time. And the biggest question, which made everyone in the lab room fall silent when thinking about it, who was that person? And who else had been held there besides them? 2 days after the Phase 2 forensic report was completed, at 2:47 a.m., the 911 line in Nye County, Nevada, received an intermittent call, a panicked driver's voice mixed with howling wind. "I'm on Highway 178, not far from Shoshone. There's a man walking in the middle of the road. No shoes, so thin I can see his bones. I think he's about to collapse." Dispatch stayed on the line, instructing the driver to turn on hazard lights and keep a safe distance. On the dash cam, the figure of a man staggering appeared, walking slowly, each step labored as if his body no longer had the strength to carry itself. Nye County Sheriff's Office deputies arrived on scene within 14 minutes. When they approached the man, he collapsed right on the roadside, mouth parched, hands trembling violently, eyes deeply sunken, and skin peeling in patches from severe sunburn and dehydration. On his body was only a thin, tattered shirt. Deputy Marshal bent down and asked, "What's your name? Can you hear me?" The man tried to open his mouth. A very faint sound came out, almost more of a breath than words. "Neil. Pahrump Hospital. Identity confirmed," and the chilling silence of the doctors. He was rushed to Desert View Hospital in Pahrump. In the ER, doctors and nurses quickly checked vitals. Abnormally low body temperature, severe dehydration, dangerously low blood pressure, irregular heartbeat. When they rolled him onto the exam table, the marks became clearer under the cold white lights. Calluses on wrists and ankles, ring-shaped, uniform, typical signs of being restrained for a long time. The resident doctor whispered to the nurse, "These marks, not from a few days. This is many months, even years." Blood tests returned results after 40 minutes. Severe vitamin D deficiency, the lowest level the doctor had ever seen in a living person. Prolonged malnutrition, body severely lacking protein and minerals. Muscle atrophy, signs from extended lack of movement. Hair breakage, brittle nails, indicators of confinement syndrome. The entire medical board looked at each other in silence. One doctor said, "He looks like someone kept underground, no light, many months, or years." Fingerprints, the undeniable answer. Nye County sent fingerprints urgently to the federal system. Just 6 minutes later, FBI responded. Match, Daniel Hart, missing person, federal kidnapping investigation. The Nye County sheriff stood frozen for a few seconds, then called Detective Rachel Kim directly. "We found him," he said. "But I have to be straight. His condition is very bad." Rachel dropped her pen. The room they had discovered, tally marks, chains, makeshift toilet, bloodstains, suddenly became all too real. Daniel wakes up, and the fragmented words piece together a nightmare. Around 9 a.m., Daniel opened his eyes for the first time. The nurse asked gently, "Do you know where you are?" He did not answer. He looked up at the ceiling, eyes lost, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing was real. Then he started crying, very quietly, very weakly, but the crying of someone who had held it in for far too long. When the doctor asked what happened, Daniel hesitated, stammered, lips trembling. The room, underground. The man, beard, thick, counting days, counting forever. No end. So dark, no sky. Daniel raised his hands to cover his face, as if the hospital light was too bright for eyes accustomed to darkness. A psychologist standing nearby said very softly to Rachel, "This is the classic description from a long-term captivity victim. He wasn't just imprisoned. He was deprived of time, light, and perception." From missing federal. File reclassified in 1 hour. Within 1 hour, the FBI activated the protocol to transfer the file. Missing person recovered alive. Evidence of long-term kidnapping. Unlawful imprisonment. Agents from VICAP, Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, were dispatched to Pahrump to handle light-level interrogation phase, while coordinating with Rachel's team, to protect the rare living witness. FBI recorded the hospital diagnosis. Injuries 100% consistent with underground captivity, prolonged malnutrition, and light deprivation for at minimum many months. Acute post-confinement psychological trauma. Nye County Sheriff signed the transfer record. The Daniel Hart file was now officially under federal jurisdiction per 18 U.S. C-1201 kidnapping. And as hospital CCTV captured Daniel curling up, hands over his head as if trying to block the flooding memories, everyone understood one thing. He did not escape from Death Valley. He survived it in a way no one could have imagined. Rachel stood outside the hospital room, looking through the clear glass. Nevada sunlight slanted into the hallway, and Daniel, the man who had once hiked in Death Valley sunlight 3 years earlier, now trembled, as if afraid of that very light. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. The case was no longer just, find Daniel Hart. It was, who kept him imprisoned for 3 years and why? The federal lab received a new batch of samples just hours after Daniel Hart was found. Fallen hair, fabric scraps from the shirt, skin cells under the fingernails, dust clinging to the collar, and especially swabs from the wrists, where the characteristic ring-shaped scars from long-term restraint were present. Everything was given absolute priority, because these were samples from a surviving victim, and every result could change the entire direction of the investigation. Rachel and the forensic team knew that if Daniel's DNA and soil matched the bunker, there would be no room for the hypothesis. Daniel got lost and temporarily sheltered. Science would confirm what his physical condition had already suggested. He had been imprisoned long-term, systematic, and intentional. Daniel's DNA in the bunker, every allele matched. That morning, the DNA expert called Rachel directly, voice both excited and heavy. We have results. Daniel Hart's DNA matches multiple samples in the bunker chains, bed frame, mattress, and part of the steel door. Rachel stopped writing immediately. What percentage match? The answer made the entire meeting room go silent. Full allele match. This isn't secondary transfer. This is high-contact DNA. Meaning Daniel lived in the bunker, not just visited, not brought in for a few hours. These are traces accumulated over a long period. The emailed report listed clearly 17 locus match on the restraint chains, 15 locus match on the bed frame, repeated contact pattern, skin cells flaked from prolonged friction, consistent with binding, hair samples matching the hair shaft found in the blanket corner. There was no doubt left. Daniel had been held in the bunker. Rachel read each line again, slowly, missing no detail. Science had confirmed what Daniel could not tell in words: soil and dust. The desert tells a more accurate story than memory. Soil forensics, one of the strongest evidences in kidnapping cases, returned results after 48 hours of analysis. The report was nearly 30 pages long, but the highlighted section was just 4 lines. Dust, soil samples collected from Daniel Hart's clothing, hair, and nails match the mineral composition from bunker site. Mica flakes, feldspar thermal degradation, quartz, reddish, high salinity microcrystals. Match probability is greater than 99.9%. One technician explained in the video meeting, the minerals in this blind spot area are extremely unique. No other place in Death Valley has a completely identical sample. Daniel didn't just pass through that area, he was in that environment long enough for the mineral dust to penetrate deep into his hair and under his nails. Those dust particles so fine they cannot be washed away with water, only fading over time. The fact that Daniel still carried them proved he had left the bunker not long before being found. Rachel noted in the file, timeline captivity. Multi-year confinement, almost certain. Daniel draws a map from memory layout, matches 90% with the real bunker. When Daniel's health improved slightly, 2 FBI agents and a psychologist began a gentle interview session in the hospital room. No pressure, no rapid-fire questions, just asking him to describe the space where he had been. Daniel's hand shook as he took the paper. No, don't want to remember, the psychologist said softly. You only draw what you want. No forcing. Daniel closed his eyes for nearly a minute. When he opened them, his hand slowly drew the first lines. A room. Bed in the left corner. Vent pipe going upward. Small door on the right. An X mark in one corner he did not explain. When Daniel stopped, the completed drawing had a layout almost identical to the real bunker diagram that Rachel and forensics had created with laser scan. Match nearly 90%. Distance between bed and ladder, correct. Position of makeshift toilet, correct. Direction of vent pipe, correct. Small room door, correct. The X matching the location of the blood stain in the back room. When Rachel looked at the drawing, it took her a few seconds to breathe normally again. There was nothing left to argue. Daniel had lived there, witnessed every detail, every dark corner, every sound in the bunker. Piecing together the layers of information, the picture is no longer blurry. When all the evidence was placed side by side, Daniel's story, once just fragmented, stammered words, now became a sharp scientific description. Daniel's DNA confirms prolonged contact in the bunker fanting. Soil, dust confirms confinement in the blind spot environment. Layout from memory matches real bunker break. Medical injuries, signs of long-term captivity. Tally marks on the wall confirm multi-year captivity. Female DNA bunker had other victims' ham. Mixture profiles, multiple victims or multiple people rotating through it. The Daniel Hart case was no longer a disappearance. Not just kidnapping. Not just confinement. Rachel understood this when she looked at the drawing Daniel had created with shaking hands. This was a systematic long-term detention site. An organization or an individual had been operating for years in the desert. No one knew. No one discovered it. And Daniel was only one part of that larger picture. Rachel submits conclusion to federal level. The truth is no longer a hypothesis. Rachel's report to the FBI and Department of Justice included the most straightforward conclusions of her career. Daniel Hart was forcibly taken and held underground for a prolonged period. Scientific evidence confirms long-term captivity. The bunker indicates multiple victims, including at least one unidentified female. The perpetrator has been active for years. Sheriff Alvarez finished reading, set the file down on the desk, and said slowly, "We're no longer searching for Daniel Hart. We're hunting someone who lives in the shadows, someone who has been abducting people and holding them underground for years." Rachel looked at the drawing Daniel had left behind. A dark room, chains, bed, vent pipe, tally marks, counting days. A bearded man, the vague figure Daniel always feared when mentioning. And she understood what all the evidence was pointing to. The person who did this was not a beginner. He had been doing it for a very long time, and very skillfully. The story Daniel told through his trembling lines became the first ironclad evidence, elevating the case to an unprecedented scale. It took Daniel nearly 48 hours for his health to stabilize enough for the first interview session. The psychologist, FBI agents, and Detective Rachel Kim sat together in the room, lights dimmed to avoid triggering post-trauma psychotic reactions. Daniel sat propped against pillows, hands clasped together, eyes still avoiding the light. But when Rachel mentioned that any detail, no matter how small, could save others, Daniel nodded very slowly, as if convincing himself he was no longer underground. The first session, old pickup truck, faded Nevada plate. Rachel asked very gently, "Daniel, do you remember anything about the person who took you?" Daniel squinted, as if pulling memories from a deep, dark place in his mind. He spoke slowly, but each word clear. Old truck, gray, red dirt, caked under the frame, Nevada plate, dented on one corner. Rachel leaned forward. "Are you sure it was Nevada?" Daniel swallowed hard. Had the letters NV, but thick dust, only saw it faintly. The FBI agent immediately noted, "Old pickup truck, Nevada plate, front corner dented." A seemingly small detail, but in long-term desert abduction cases, it was extremely important. Daniel continued, hands slightly shaking. The engine was loud. Old kind. Uneven pistons. You could tell right away. An audio technician would later simulate the engine sound based on this description, but in that moment, Rachel just nodded lightly. Knowing the bunker's deep canyon location made sounds echo, helping Daniel remember more accurately than usual. The bearded man, smell of engine oil and raspy breathing. When asked about the person who directly interacted with him, Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, pupils trembling slightly. The guy, tall, big, thick beard covering his whole face, smelled like engine oil, like a garage. The psychologist asked further, "What kind of engine oil smell? Gasoline or motor oil?" Daniel exhaled sharply, trying to recall. "Like old motor oil. And cigarette smoke. Heavy kind. Really harsh." Rachel noted on the board. "Smoker heavy brand. Mechanic smell. Likely works with engines. Heavy facial hair." Daniel muttered one more sentence that made everyone in the room stop writing. He spoke very little. Raspy voice, like cigarette smoke, had worn down his throat. FBI noted immediately. Raspy voice, minimal speech, heavy smoking habit, engine oil smell fits mechanical occupation, auto repair, or workshop work. In the bunker one single time hearing a woman's voice, Rachel shifted the topic very carefully. "Daniel, during the time you were held, was anyone else there?" Daniel lowered his head. His whole body tensed like a drawn string. The psychologist signaled Rachel to slow down. After a moment, Daniel spoke softly, as if afraid of his own voice. I heard crying. A woman's crying." Rachel felt the entire room sink. She asked gently, "Did you hear it only once?" Daniel nodded. "Only once. Heard it for a few minutes. Then it stopped completely. That sound." Those few minutes now became one of the biggest leads, because forensics had already confirmed the blood in the small room belonged to a woman not in CODIS. Daniel had no idea that what he heard matched the scientific evidence perfectly. The hatch opening scheduled the cold routine of the bunker operator. Daniel was asked about the frequency of the man's appearances. "Not regular," Daniel said. "But usually 3 days. Or 4 days. Sometimes longer." "How did you know?" Rachel asked. "The pickup engine sound, then heavy footsteps. Step by step. Every time the hatch opened, he would throw down water, canned food." Rachel asked, "Did he ever talk?" Daniel shook his head. "Almost never. Just said, 'Eat, or don't cause trouble.'" Raspy voice. Hard to hear. The 3 to 4 day cycle was a very important pattern. It showed the perpetrator lived or worked within a close enough radius to maintain the bunker. It also showed high level of control, not impulsive behavior. The moment Daniel was taken into the bunker, fragmented memory, but still containing gold information. When asked about the abduction moment, Daniel shook so much the doctor had to place a hand on his shoulder to calm him. "Don't try to remember what you can't," the doctor said. "Only say it when you feel safe." Daniel breathed rapidly a few times, then said, "I was on the trail." Someone called out. Then heard heavy steps. Knocked me down. Smelled oil, cigarette smoke, and sound of truck door opening. He raised his hand to his neck, where an old scar was. "I think I was hit on the back of the head. Everything went black. Then when I woke up, I was already underground." FBI recorded. Abduction by physical overpowering rapid transport vehicle, confinement underground placement. And, most importantly, Daniel described the old pickup door, creaking hinge. A small detail, but it helps narrow down the vehicle type. Rachel pieces the clues together and sees the big picture forming. When the interview session ended, Rachel stepped out into the hospital hallway, leaned her back against the wall, arms tightly crossed. Every detail, Daniel provided: the uneven engine sound, old oil smell, heavy smoking habit, 3 to 4 day resupply schedule, Nevada plate, thick beard, raspy voice. The woman's voice, once heard in the bunker, fitted into the forensic picture. Bunker existed for many years. At least one female victim. Multiple different male DNA dolls. Multiple victims passed through mosting. Perpetrator, familiar with blind spot terrain boy. Vehicle type old pickup with Dentmore. Regular return cycle. Signs of a mechanical laborer. It was no longer hypothesis. It was an accurate description of an abductor operating a bunker for years. Rachel looked through the glass door of the hospital room, where Daniel lay under the blanket, eyes closed, lips moving as if unconsciously counting something. The tally marks on the bunker wall flashed in her mind again, line by line, hundreds and hundreds of lines. And she understood. The man Daniel described was not random. He was a ghost, living in the desert, and had perfected the skill of holding people long before encountering Daniel Hart. As soon as there was enough description of the bunker operator's habits, supplies, and lifestyle, Rachel shifted to a cut-the-supply investigation direction, tracing back the items found in the bunker: industrial canned food, heavy-duty chains, professional duct tape, old-generation solar panel, hand-soldered LED lights, 5-gallon water jugs. All were not one-time purchases but repeated accumulations. To run an underground bunker for years, the perpetrator had to shop at familiar locations in the Nevada desert area. Rachel compiled a list of 31 key stores around Pahrump, Beatty, Amargosa Valley, Tonopah, including hardware stores, gas stations with mini-marts, small groceries, and surplus shops selling military overstock. She sent requests for camera footage retrieval from 2018 to 2025. It was nearly impossible, but many small Nevada stores kept footage unusually long, partly because they rarely upgraded systems, partly out of habit to keep it just in case of theft. Within 10 days, the FBI video analysis team, coordinating with Rachel, extracted over 600 hours of footage, frames that seemed meaningless: customers buying sandwiches, drivers getting water, locals picking up cigarettes. But they looked for common points. Who bought large quantities of canned food? Who bought heavy chain? Who bought solar panels only DIY types use? And then a sequence of images began to emerge, scattered over years. But the face and habits, strangely identical. A tall, big man with thick beard, quiet repeating in cameras over 6 years. Store in Beatty, 2021. Bearded man buys 12 cans of the cheapest meat, plus 2 large rolls of duct tape. Gas station near Shoshone, 2020. Same man buys heavy brand cigarettes, Marlboro Red, and 3-gallon water jugs. Surplus shop in Tonopah, 2019. This man buys an old solar panel. Exact type is on the bunker. Hardware store in Pahrump, 2022. Buys heavy chain. Load rating over 700 pounds. Exact type forensics found in the bunker. In every footage, the man wore thick denim shirt, broad shoulders, thick beard covering nearly his whole face, head slightly down, almost no words to the cashier. One standout feature: he always paid in cash. Rachel projected each frame on the meeting room screen, connecting them by timeline. This guy kept the pattern for 6 years. Canned, food, water, chain, duct tape, DIY electrical supplies, all matching bunker maintenance. Sheriff Alvarez looked at the screen and sighed softly. We've seen him many times, but didn't know what he was supplying underground. The old pickup terrifyingly matching detail with Daniel's statement. One footage at Pahrump Minimart 2023 showed the man walking out of the store and getting into a 1997 Ford F-250 pickup. Light gray, thick dust, slight body cracks, especially left front corner dented, exactly as Daniel described when recalling the vehicle that took him. Camera clearly captured the plate. Nevada 5K 84N2. Rachel entered it into the Nevada DMV registration system. It took 8 seconds for the name to appear. Randall Marcus Pike, 52 years old, registered address in Pahrump. Occupation: oil rig contractor, unemployed since 2014. Rachel said quietly, "This name fits every piece we have." Criminal record: exact profile of someone capable of escalating violence. Nevada court records showed Randall Pike had multiple arrests. 2003 bar assault in El Cobis. 2006 neighbor harassment in Tonopah. 2011 illegal weapon possession. 2014 fight with coworker on rig. Fired heft. After that, he lived drifting in small towns around the edge of Death Valley. All priors recorded as misdemeanor. Not enough for fingerprints to enter modern systems like AFIS, updated after 2018. But Rachel knew. Violent offenders tend to escalate. And someone handling engine oil, machinery, and heavy mechanics, fully skilled enough to dig and operate a bunker. AFIS update, and the match that changes everything. Rachel requested forensics rerun all bunker fingerprints using the 2025 updated AFIS version, which better reads partial prints. The technician took over an hour to input the ridge fragments into the system. When the result appeared, the room fell silent for a few seconds, then the whole team leaned in closer almost simultaneously. Match confirmed. Randall Marcus Pike, 6 partial fingerprints, matched with bunker materials. Fingerprints matched. Steel hatch edge, chains, bed frame, vent pipe. Rachel stiffened, gripping the table edge tightly. The perpetrator was no longer a shadow in the desert. He had a name. He had a vehicle. He had a history of violence. And he had placed his hands on the items that held Daniel for 3 years. Randall Pike, suspect number 1. The FBI immediately placed Randall Pike on the list. Priority suspect level 1. Criminal kidnapping. Long-term imprisonment. Potential serial confinement operator. Rachel said nothing for several minutes. She watched each footage, Randall walking into stores, buying canned food, buying chains, buying water, paying cash, getting into the dented corner pickup, a loop spanning many years. She recalled Daniel's words. The bearded guy, oil smell, raspy voice, spoke little, heard a woman crying, counting days. Everything pieced together into one single face, Randall Pike. And what chilled Rachel more than identifying the perpetrator was the terrifying question beginning to form in her mind. If Randall had been operating the bunker for years, then Daniel was never the first victim, and certainly not the last. Right after Randall Pike became suspect number 1, the FBI transferred the Daniel Hart file to a special unit, Mojave Field Investigations Task Force, the team specializing in long-term disappearances along the Nevada-California border. This was the group that had handled mysterious desert vanishings in the Mojave for 2 decades. They maintained a private database with hundreds of missing persons files, most never solved. When an FBI investigator told Rachel, Daniel Hart is not standing alone, she immediately understood the case had changed in nature. No longer one person abducted, no longer one isolated bunker, but a network of victims spanning years, possibly dozens. Opening the Mojave Missing Cases Archive, first time in 20 years, the task force opened the system interface in front of Rachel. MMR Archive, Mojave Missing Registry, compiling all missing persons in the vast desert area stretching from Death Valley, Pahrump, Amargosa Valley, Shoshone to Tonopah and the edges of Mojave National Preserve. Among over 80 still unresolved files, Rachel was asked to focus on cases with characteristics. Victim alone, disappeared near desert roads, small towns, no vehicle signs, failed SAR files. Victims described as vulnerable, hitchhikers, tourists, young people, timeline overlapping Pike's time living in the Mojave area. As Rachel scrolled down the list, one thing became clear. Daniel was not the first case in this pattern. GIS mapping. Scattered points turn into a crime map. An FBI GIS engineer opened ArcGIS Pro and began loading data layers. Layer 1, underground bunker, coordinates in the Blind Spot Canyon, where Daniel was held. Layer 2, Death Valley, John Doe location, bone fragments found years earlier, initially thought to be Daniel's but DNA no match. Layer 3, disappearance location of a female hitchhiker in 2014. Name, Maya Sanderson, 23 years old, vanished while hitchhiking on Highway 95 near Amargosa Valley. Layer 4, Randall Pike's movement route, based on gas receipts, gas station cameras, store invoices, appearances on Pahrump, Beatty, Tonopah cameras. When the layers overlapped, the map revealed a chilling pattern. A familiar travel arc for Randall Pike, and each point on it coincided with a disappearance. Rachel looked at the map, feeling her heart drop. Pike's routes were not random. They followed cycles. Gas, buy water, buy canned food, return to bunker area. And along that route, many people had vanished without a trace. Cold Case 2014 female hitchhiker Maya Sanderson. Maya Sanderson's file was reopened immediately. She was from Oregon, backpacking, fond of hitchhiking state to state. Last seen, standing in front of a small gas station in Amargosa Valley, asking for a ride toward Pahrump. Camera footage very blurry, but still showed a gray pickup stopping, passenger door opening, image too noisy to identify plate. File remained unsolved for 11 years. But now, with Randall Pike as suspect, everything was viewed with new eyes. Female DNA in bunker matches Maya Sanderson's family. Forensics reopened the female blood sample from the small bunker room. Initial CODIS run no hit, but with the new suspect case, FBI contacted Maya's family for reference DNA. 3 weeks later, the lab sent the report. Partial match, first-degree relative. The blood sample belongs to Maya Sanderson. No one in the room breathed for several seconds. A heavy confirmation. The bunker had held at least one female victim, Maya, in 2014. Rachel closed her eyes, imagining a young woman locked in the small room, exactly where forensics found the blood. What Daniel described hearing a woman cry suddenly became a terrifyingly real memory. Death Valley John Doe location. Why so close to Pike's route? Forensics revisited the John Doe bone samples found dozens of kilometers from Daniel's disappearance site. Not Daniel, but when plotted on the map, it was only about 4 miles from one of Pike's frequent stops. Rachel placed her finger on the map and said slowly, "We thought those were bones of someone lost, but it's exactly on Pike's route, meaning John Doe could be another victim," a forensic technician said. If so, the bunker may be only one of many sites he used. No DNA linking John Doe to Pike yet, but the coincidence was too large to ignore. The undeniable truth. This is a serial offender investigation. When all the GIS data, camera footage, pickup truck, DNA, and disappearance timelines were synchronized, the FBI issued the official conclusion. Case Daniel Hart is no longer a standalone kidnapping case. It is part of a broader investigation into a potential serial kidnapper and possibly serial killer operating across the Mojave Desert region for over a decade. Rachel sat staring at the map with the red dots, the people who had vanished, and a curved travel line of one man living in the desert, a man who had learned how to abduct victims, hold them underground, and turn them into tally marks on the wall. Now, the Daniel case had become the key unlocking the entire network. Bunker, Maya John Doe, Daniel Randall, Pike Mojave, missing cases, Sheriff Alvarez said quietly, almost to himself. We're not just facing one kidnapper. We're facing someone who has spread a net across the Mojave and used it for years. Rachel looked back at Maya's file, the female hitchhiker the world had forgotten, then at Daniel's file, the survivor who told the story. Now she knew one thing for sure. The man they were hunting was not random. He had existed in the Mojave shadows for too long, and now finally he had been dragged into the light. Right after Randall Pike became a level 1 suspect and bunker DNA confirmed Maya Sanderson as the second victim, the FBI made a critical decision. All information about the bunker must be kept absolutely confidential. No media, no press release, no leaks in the system. If Pike knew the bunker had been discovered, he could flee into the desert, destroy remaining evidence, or worse, abduct another victim to throw off the investigation. Rachel understood they were dealing with a man who lived alone, skilled in survival fighting, knew how to read terrain, and was completely comfortable vanishing into the Mojave. Confronting him directly without a plan meant failure. So the entire federal team shifted to the trapping phase, multi-layer surveillance, without letting Pike notice. Setting up the surveillance system. 4 layers netting around Pike. The FBI divided the monitoring operation into 4 layers. Focused on Randall Pike's habits and behavior. Layer 1. Hidden cameras at gas stations. Based on his 10-year movement pattern, Pike had 3 favorite gas stations. Pahrump Highway Gas, Beatty Quick Stop, Amargosa Junction Market. All were equipped with tiny cameras within 24 hours, disguised in restroom paper dispensers, advertising sign corners, old gas pumps. Each camera streamed live to the monitoring center in the FBI Las Vegas office. Layer 2. Undercover vehicles. 3 civilian vehicles were positioned around Pahrump. Drivers, undercover agents dressed as workers, truckers, or tourists. Tasks. Tail Pike when he left a gas station. Absolutely no exposed tail. Record direction every time he left the main road. Layer 3. Long-range drones. Since the bunker was in a partially restricted BLM fly zone, Rachel obtained emergency federal clearance to deploy long-range drones with thermal cameras, operating beyond human sight or sound range. Drones only used in remote canyon areas where no one would notice. Layer 4. Digital tracking. FBI could not ping Pike's GPS, but could trace unusual cash transactions, hardware store, cameras, pickup movement via automatic traffic cameras. These data points created Pike's biological rhythm, map his daily habit pattern. Rachel said in the briefing, "He doesn't know we're watching. He thinks the bunker is still safe. We have to catch him when he feels safest." Pike appears familiar pattern repeats. 3 days after surveillance began, at 4:15 p.m., a hidden camera at Pahrump gas station flagged red. Randall Pike just exited the store. He was carrying 6 cans of meat, 2-gallon jugs of water, 1 pack of Marlboro Red cigarettes. Rachel stood up abruptly, seeing the live stream image. He's in the resupply cycle. An undercover agent started the engine, keeping 200 meters behind Pike's pickup. Drone began moving along the predicted route toward Highway 95. In the undercover vehicle cabin, the agent said over radio, "Pickup driving slow. I have visual." No sign he spotted the tail. Rachel watched the screen. "Continue following. Keep distance. Don't let him notice." Situation changes. Pike approaches a female hitchhiker. 5:02 p.m. Camera at Amargosa Junction gas station activated. A young woman standing by a sign, "Need ride to Beatty." Small backpack. Unaware of the danger approaching. Randall Pike's pickup entered the frame. He slowed down. Stopped right next to the girl. Passenger door opened. He leaned his head and said something. Rachel shouted in the operations room, "Stop, don't let him take another one." FBI had never seen Pike approach anyone since Daniel escaped. This meant he didn't know the investigation had expanded. He was hunting a new victim. He was preparing to reoffend. Another agent reported, "Rapid response team is 8 minutes out." "We don't have 8 minutes." Rachel gripped the table edge tightly. "If he takes the girl and drives into the desert, we'll never see her again." Tactics change from investigation to prevention. This was no longer surveillance. This was preventing a crime in progress. Rachel said over radio, "Execute arrest warrant." Repeat, "Execute arrest warrant immediately." Sheriff Alvarez confirmed. Arrest warrant activated under 18 U.S.C. 1201. Kidnapping. Randall Pike is now an armed and dangerous target. The mobile task force rushed to the gas station at once, from 3 directions. North from Beatty, south from Pahrump, east from Shoshone. On the hidden camera, Randall Pike was still standing next to the woman, reaching toward her backpack. The girl hesitated. A fragile moment between life and being taken away. Rachel said quietly, as if to herself, "She has no idea, she just literally escaped death." 0 hour, the unprecedented confrontation begins. As Pike started stepping into the pickup cabin, task force vehicle lights flashed on. 4 vehicles surrounding the gas station simultaneously. FBI rushed out, guns aimed straight, shouting, "Randall Pike, FBI." The hidden camera captured him, turning his head, eyes shocked, mixed with aggression like a beast blocked at its den entrance after years evading every net. After 3 years, Daniel lived in underground darkness. After over a decade of victims vanishing in the desert, 0 hour had come. The moment task force vehicles stormed into Amargosa Junction gas station, Randall Pike jerked around. In a split second, he narrowed his eyes, realizing it wasn't station security but FBI and sheriff surrounding him. Instinctively, he reached down to his hip, exactly the spot agents are trained to see as a weapon draw sign. Rachel shouted over radio, "Hand to hip, close in." 3 agents charged forward. 1 wrapped Pike's arm, the second pinned his shoulder down onto the dusty hood, the third locked his left arm, yanking hard to separate from the danger zone. Randall roared, raspy voice, thick cigarette breath blasting out in the hot sun. He thrashed like a giant monster, but the trained force of 3 officers gave him no chance. In under 10 seconds, he was forced face down on the pavement, both hands tightly cuffed in steel, legs restrained, agent gun pressed behind his neck. Randall Pike, the man who lived in Mojave shadows for over a decade, was subdued. Suspect in custody. 3 words rang over radio. Short, but weighing tons. The female hitchhiker was led to a corner, trembling but safe. She stammered, He said he'd give me a ride to Beatty. She had no idea that if she got in, she could have become a new tally mark in the bunker. Search of the pickup nightmare in the truck bed. After the arrest, FBI conducted a search of the gray Ford F-250 with the dented left corner. This was the truck Daniel described, the truck that appeared in cameras for years, and the truck hitchhiker victims had climbed into, never to get out. In the truck bed, forensics found large nylon rope, matching bunker-type plate, 2 rolls of duct tape, same color, and brand of, a water-stained map, marked with the canyon area where the bunker was map, strong flashlight, covered in red dust, pack of Marlboro Red cigarettes, matching Daniel's description, reddish mica sand, matching bunker minerals. Looking at the map with faint pencil lines, Rachel said quietly, he didn't just know where the bunker was. He planned every route. Search of the camp where Randall lived and kept secrets. From Randall's preliminary statement, he stayed silent, only growling when questioned. FBI located his camp nearly 20 miles from Pahrump, on a BLM area rarely visited. The camp was just a torn old trailer, but what was inside made everyone freeze. During the search, forensics discovered Maya Sanderson's 2014 personal items, leather bracelet, broken compact camera, small notebook recording her journey, photos of the bunker at various stages, photo of vent pipe when new, photo of steel hatch before sand cover, photo of intact solar panel, inside bunker photos taken with old phone, bunker construction tools, earth drill, and the side, spare steel pipes, electrical wire, a series of items from unidentified victims' cords, 2 empty wallets, women's jacket, motel key card of unknown person, small-size hiking shoes. Forensics held a bunker photo from the trailer, dusty but clear lines. It was exactly the bunker before Pike covered it with sand for camouflage. Rachel said, he photographed his own work. This wasn't random. He was proud of it. Piecing together the crime timeline, the truth revealed layer by layer. The FBI, federal prosecutors, and Rachel gathered in the command room, building a crime timeline for Randall Pike, spanning over a decade. Hunting cycle, based on cameras, receipts, and habits. Pike cruised around gas stations on the Nevada-California border, approached hitchhikers, backpackers, targeted solitary or trusting victims. Abduction process, used old pickup to approach, knocked down or exploited trust to lure into vehicle, drugged or direct assault, took straight to bunker in blind spot. Movement traces. GIS mapping showed Pike always took 3 routes: Pahrump-Amargosa Valley, Beatty-Furnace Creek, Tonopah-Mojave Edge, all forming a hunting triangle. Victim selection, not by race or gender, but by risk group, hitchhikers, solo tourists, people lost on trails. Bunker mobile prison in the desert. Forensics concluded the bunker was not built once and abandoned. He maintained it, expanded it, replaced solar panel, replaced vent pipe. This was a calculated detention system, operated like a personal prison facility. Prosecutors prepare indictment multiple federal charges. When evidence was strong enough, federal prosecutors announced the charges against Randall Pike. Kidnapping, 18. USC 1201. False imprisonment, torture, attempted murder regarding Daniel Hart. Homicide, related to Maya Sanderson. Interstate endangerment. Using a facility for confinement, total potential sentence. Multiple consecutive life terms. Rachel stood looking at the crime timeline covering the wall. From Maya, 2014, to John Doe, to Daniel 2022, to 2025, to the hitchhiker who almost became the next victim at Amargosa Junction. Everything pieced together into a clear, brutal, suffocating reality. Randall Pike had hunted people in the Mojave Desert for years without anyone knowing. The bunker was only a small part of the system he built. And now, after years hiding in desert shadows, he had been dragged into the light with no escape left. The federal trial, United States v. Randall Pike, took place in Las Vegas in an atmosphere of unprecedented tension. Every day, The courtroom was packed with press, experts, families of victims linked to the chain of disappearances spanning nearly 20 years in the Mojave. At the defendant dock, Randall Pike sat motionless, deep-set eyes, graying mustache, face reminiscent of someone far more accustomed to total darkness than the harsh, cold lights of justice. Prosecution opened by reconstructing the entire crime structure. Underground bunker, hunting cycle, Nevada-plated pickup, and his appearances around gas stations where victims were last approached. But the most impressive and shocking part was the bone fragments reassembled through forensic science. Forensics testify before the jury. Experts appeared one by one to present each piece. Digital forensics proved Pike's travel routes via receipts, raw tower GPS, and data from his old devices. 3D cell tower model, rebuilt by network engineer, showed Daniel's final ping exactly in the bunker area. Not signal noise, not error. This is the actual location, the expert affirmed. DNA from inside the bunker. Mixture of multiple sources, but alleles fully matching Daniel's DNA, and female blood matching Maya Sanderson's family. Soil and dust analysis. Minerals on Daniel's clothing and in his hair, 100% matching bunker site and blind spot area. Fingerprints. Partial prints remaining on water pipe and steel hatch, matching Pike's old record and APHIS. Cameras. Over 10 years of scattered appearances at gas stations, buying supplies identical to bunker equipment. Finally came Daniel Hart's testimony. He stepped to the stand, thinner, but voice clear enough for everyone to hear. I counted every day on the wall. I never thought I'd stand here. He described the engine oil smell, the pickup stopping, the only light from the weak solar panel, and the figure of the bearded man Randall Pike opening the bunker hatch. Prosecution closed presentation. Daniel is the only survivor strong enough to tell the story, but not the only victim. Verdict. No chance to return to the desert. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Federal kidnapping, long-term imprisonment, aggravated assault, federal homicide, and attempted murder. The judge sentenced. Life imprisonment without parole. Randall Pike would never see the Mojave again, except in the pitch-black dreams he himself created. Rachel sat in the back, exhaling slowly. Daniel sat beside his wife, his hand trembling lightly. But for the first time in 3 years, that hand was not shaking from fear. The aftermath spreads across America. Right after the trial, the Department of the Interior and BLM launched a comprehensive sweep across the entire Mojave, Death Valley, and adjacent federal lands. They found 7 small unfinished bunkers, 3 illegal structures that had been covered over, multiple suspicious areas with old digging signs. None were as sophisticated as Pike's bunker, but the case made them realize a terrifying truth. The desert can hide anything, even crimes spanning decades. National SAR procedure changes. From Daniel's case, SAR search and rescue, nationwide updated protocols for every missing person incident. Mandatory reanalysis of cell tower data when discovering the network in the area had undergone upgrades. Establishment of blind spot protocol, prioritizing checks for bunkers or illegal underground structures, direct linkage to FBI from the first 48 hours in desert conditions. Daniel Hart became a national case study on missing captive survival, taught in Ranger training courses, FBI missing persons units, and advanced SAR classes. The whole of America looked back at Death Valley, a harsh but familiar natural place with different eyes. The media called it the desert that keeps secrets. Not just because people can die in 122 degrees Fahrenheit heat, but because a predator had once hidden among the rock crevices and canyons, operating silently for decades without anyone knowing. But the Randall Pike trial ended with one clear truth. No matter how vast the desert, no matter how sand can swallow traces, there are still people who will follow every grain of dust to pull victims back into the light. The story of Daniel Hart is not just a horrifying disappearance in Death Valley. It reflects an important reality of American life today. This vast country has wild lands, safety blind spots, where people often let their guard down, where monitoring systems have limits, and where predators like Randall Pike can exploit to commit crimes. The fact that Daniel entered Death Valley thinking, just going for a bit and coming back, mirrors the habit of many Americans who love hiking, road trips, and backpacking. But his story reminds us that nature is never completely harmless, and society is not always absolutely safe. The detail of the initial wrong cell tower ping highlights a lesson about technology. Modern systems are not always accurate. In daily life, this reminds us not to rely entirely on devices, GPS, or cell signal when in remote areas. Always have backup plans, inform others of your itinerary, and avoid going alone in isolated places. The investigation also shows the importance of updating procedures and not overlooking small details. Rachel Kim discovered that the cell tower log from the year Daniel vanished was wrong due to network upgrades, a small error that caused SAR to scan the wrong entire area. This applies directly to life. When something doesn't add up, be ready to revisit initial assumptions. Don't hesitate to question data or common sense. Finally, the existence of the underground bunker and Randall Pike approaching victims at gas stations reminds us of a sometimes hard-to-accept truth. Criminals are not always lurking in the dark. Sometimes they stand in the most ordinary places. Therefore, in America today, the most practical advice is proactive vigilance, especially when traveling alone, passing through small towns, late-night gas stations, or vast desert areas. Daniel's story is not just past horror. It is a powerful reminder that preparation and vigilance can save lives. If you want to keep following survival and thrilling investigation stories like the Daniel Hart case, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any journeys. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. See you in the next video, where we continue unveiling the mysteries America still hides.